The knock on my door came at 2:17 in the morning, 3 slow knocks that sounded strangely desperate in the silence of the night. When I opened it, my neighbor Emily stood there barefoot in the cold hallway, wearing an oversized gray sweater, holding a small overnight bag against her chest. Her eyes were red from crying, and before I could ask what had happened, she looked at me and whispered the question that would change both our lives: "Is there room in your bed?" For a few seconds, I simply stared at her. Then I realized she wasn't asking for romance. She was asking for somewhere she could finally feel safe. I stepped aside and told her there was room, but only if she promised me she wouldn't leave tomorrow. My name is Daniel, and until that night, Emily and I had been nothing more than neighbors who occasionally exchanged polite smiles in the elevator. She lived in apartment 4B, and I lived directly across the hall in 4A. I knew she worked long hours at a small medical clinic downtown, knew she watered the plants outside her door every Sunday morning, and knew she always carried groceries upstairs instead of using the elevator when she thought it was broken. But I didn't know the sadness behind her quiet smile. I didn't know that every evening, when her apartment lights came on, she was entering a place that no longer felt like home. And I certainly didn't know how close she was to losing herself completely. Before we continue, if you believe that sometimes one small act of kindness can give someone a reason to keep going, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes in second chances, leave a comment, and subscribe to Kindness Studio. You never know when a story like this might remind someone that they are not as alone as they feel. That night, I let Emily inside without asking questions. She stood near the doorway as if she expected me to change my mind. I noticed her hands trembling, so I quietly made her a cup of tea. She sat on the edge of my couch, staring at the steam rising from the mug, and finally told me that she had received a message from her younger sister. Their mother had been admitted to a hospital in another city, and Emily had spent the entire evening trying to reach her father, who had disappeared from their lives years earlier. When she returned home, she found the apartment door unlocked. Nothing had been stolen, but someone had clearly been inside. The police told her it was probably an attempted burglary, yet the thought of sleeping alone in that apartment had become unbearable. She had called 3 friends. One was out of town. Another didn't answer. The third told her she could come over in the morning because she was already asleep. Emily had stood in the hallway for almost an hour, staring at my door. She said she remembered how I had once helped her carry a broken bookshelf downstairs and had never made her feel embarrassed about needing help. That tiny memory had made her knock. I told her she could stay. When she asked about the bed, I explained that I would sleep on the couch and she could take the bedroom. But she shook her head. She said she didn't want to be alone behind another closed door. That was when I understood what she really meant. She wasn't looking for a man. She was looking for another human being in the room. So I placed an extra blanket on one side of my bed and slept on the opposite side, fully dressed, leaving enough space between us to make her comfortable. Neither of us slept much. The rain tapped against the window, and every time a car passed outside, Emily opened her eyes. Around 4 in the morning, she finally whispered that she was tired of pretending she was strong. I didn't give her advice. I simply told her she didn't have to pretend with me. Those words seemed to break something inside her. She turned away, pulled the blanket over her shoulders, and quietly cried. I stared at the ceiling, realizing how strange life could be. Sometimes you can live beside someone for years and never realize they are carrying a mountain inside their chest. Morning came slowly. Emily apologized for everything and said she would return home after work. I reminded her of what I had said the night before. There was room, but only if she didn't feel she had to disappear the moment the sun came up. She smiled faintly and said she wasn't sure anyone had ever said something like that to her. Over the next few days, she stayed mostly in her apartment during daylight but came over each evening. Sometimes we ate dinner together. Sometimes we watched old movies without speaking. Once, she fell asleep on my couch with a book resting on her chest, and I realized that the woman who had seemed so distant in the hallway was simply exhausted from surviving alone. But just when things began to feel normal, I received a message from Emily saying she had decided to leave the city. Her mother's condition had worsened, and Emily planned to move closer to her family. I understood why, but the news left an emptiness I hadn't expected. Somewhere between shared dinners and quiet conversations, I had started caring about her more deeply than I had admitted to myself. That evening, she came to my apartment with tears in her eyes. She said she was afraid of leaving because staying meant facing everything she had been avoiding, but leaving meant abandoning the first place where she had felt safe in years. I told her that safety wasn't a building or an apartment. It was knowing there was someone who would answer when you knocked. She looked at me for a long moment and asked why I had helped her when we barely knew each other. I told her the truth. Years earlier, after my father died, I had spent months pretending I was fine. People kept telling me to be strong, and eventually I became so good at pretending that nobody noticed I was falling apart. One elderly neighbor had noticed, though. She used to leave a cup of coffee outside my door every morning without saying anything. She never tried to fix me. She simply reminded me that someone cared whether I made it through the day. I told Emily that helping her was my way of passing that kindness forward. She cried again, but this time her tears carried something different. They weren't only pain. They were relief. A week later, Emily went to see her mother. I expected that to be the end of our strange little chapter, but 3 days later, she returned. She knocked on my door just after sunset, carrying 2 bags and wearing the same gray sweater from that first night. When I opened the door, she smiled and said her mother had stabilized. Then she admitted that she had realized something on the long drive back. She didn't want to spend the rest of her life running away whenever things became painful. She wanted to stay. Not because of me alone, but because she had finally remembered that she was allowed to build a life instead of merely surviving one. Months passed. Emily moved into a small apartment closer to her mother, but she never really left my life. We continued having dinners together, helping each other with ordinary things, and slowly becoming something neither of us had expected. There was no dramatic confession, no perfect movie ending. There were arguments, difficult days, hospital visits, bills, exhaustion, and moments when fear returned. But there was also laughter. There were Sunday mornings with coffee. There were grocery lists stuck to the refrigerator. There were nights when one of us would knock on the other's door simply because the day had been too heavy to carry alone. 1 year after that rainy night, Emily stood outside my apartment holding a small box. Inside was the spare key I had given her months earlier. She placed it in my hand and told me she wanted me to understand something. That night, when she had asked whether there was room in my bed, she hadn't really been asking for a place to sleep. She had been asking whether there was room in someone's life for a person who was scared, imperfect, grieving, and still trying to heal. And my answer had changed everything. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who may need to hear that they matter, and subscribe to Kindness Studio. Sometimes the person standing quietly beside us isn't asking us to save them. Sometimes they are only asking us not to walk away. Before the final line, I have one special request for you. Comment, there is always room for kindness, if you believe everyone deserves a second chance and a safe place to begin again. Because sometimes the most important door you ever open isn't the door to your home. It is the door that tells another human being, you don't have to face tomorrow alone.